thank you for catching up with us. You've been ambassador to Australia for 2 months now. How would you describe Russia's relationship with Australia?
Well, in fact, it's been a short time for me in Australia, but long enough to appreciate the huge potential for meaningful bilateral relations we have. First of all, I would like to mention the kind and very warm attitude of the Australians I felt right from my first day here. And very soon I discovered the Australians had a passion for Russian culture. And I was there in Brisbane when the theatre was giving a standing ovation to the Bolshoi artists. And just now I'm back from Adelaide, where the David Roche's Foundation arranged a beautiful exhibition of pieces of art related to the Romanovs family and Fabergé. I also had several meetings with the business community here and with some state governments, and it revealed a strong interest here in Australia for doing business with Russia. I'm very glad to see that last year our bilateral trade, rose by 28%, and this despite the bilateral sanctions, which proved more and more counterproductive, as well as absolutely illegitimate US secondary sanctions. So I think we have good prospects in economic relations. As to the international field of international politics, of course, we have Russia and Australia, we have our differences. Yet, as two responsible members of international community, as two countries of the Asia Pacific, we have every reason to maintain political dialogue, to consult each other, and to interact on different international fora. A case in point is the latest G20 summit in Osaka, where Russia supported the Australian initiative on preventing the internet to be exploited by terrorists.
How do you think the Australian media has portrayed Russia during recent times?
Well, I would say Australian media follows the mainstream of the world media. And the mainstream nowadays is unfortunately to discredit Russia. That's how it is. And I'm judging by my own experience I already had here. Just recently, a well-known Australian newspaper published an editorial on MH17, which carried many accusations against Russia. And besides the general, very hostile tonality, it had some assertions which were simply not true to the facts. Then the embassy wrote a letter to the newspaper asking to publish our comments as an opinion item. And one of my new Australian friends told me that I had absolutely no chance to see our comments published. And I disagreed, and I said that, well, the standards of democratic journalism all but guarantee the alternative point of view will be duly represented. And we made a bet, and I lost. And finally the embassy published its point of view through the social accounts.
So do you feel there's been bias by
terms of MH17, yes. I think that the media, and the Australian media, in fact, do not reflect the reality in terms of Russia right from the beginning, being very eager to find the truth. Especially because so many fingers were being pointed at my country. And in fact, our contribution to the investigation was very significant. We provided satellite imagery, we provided raw primary radar data. And by the way, Ukraine failed to provide such data, alleging that all of its relevant radars were out of order on the day of the crash. And this somehow didn't raise any eyebrows in the Dutch Safety Board. Instead, they concentrated on discrediting Russian radar data, saying they were unclear. When we tried to find out who were the experts who made such a conclusion and what was their professional level, we never received answer. In terms of our contribution, I also would like to mention a company, a Russian company, which who are in fact designers and producers of the Buk missiles. The name is Almaz Antey, and they arranged a very complex life-size experiment involving a controlled detonation of a Buk missile over a cockpit of an old out-of-use plane. And the results were very significant in terms of making more precise calculations of the trajectory of the missile and therefore of the place from where it was fired. Unfortunately, these results were discarded again by the investigation. Speaking of the criminal part of the investigation conducted by the Dutch prosecution, I must say it also has been very selective right from the beginning. Russia was flatly denied the participation in the JIT, and another country, Malaysia, in fact the country of the airlines and the country which had more than 40 of its citizens on board of the plane, also was not allowed to enter the team. They were only allowed 3.5 months later. And by that time, the initial members, Australia, Belgium, Netherlands and Ukraine, had in place already a non-disclosure agreement, which gave Ukraine effective veto power over all the public releases of the team.
How big are your concerns about Russia's exclusion from the JIT?
Our concerns are that such an exclusion negatively affects the conclusions. It means that our information, our data, our point of view are not duly represented. They are being discarded, and we think it's not by chance.
You mentioned AFP's Commander Herr Khrushchev's request for the serial numbers of the missile that took down MH17. How seriously was this request taken in Moscow?
Yes, I must say that the 24th of May 2018 was a very important day. The JIT, probably for the first time, presented not just computer animation, not just video clips copy-pasted from Bellingcat reports, not just telephone calls, intercepts provided by the Ukrainian security service, which could not be obviously checked independently. The JIT, and namely its Australian member, Commander Hurst, displayed a real, feasible piece of evidence. Wreckage of the missile itself, which bared serial numbers. And we felt, right from the beginning, that this could lead to important conclusions. And when the JIT called for any information which could be found about this wreckage, what we did, we checked the serial numbers against the Soviet time archives. And we soon found that the missile in question was delivered on December 29 of 1986 to a Soviet Army Air Defense Unit number 20152, stationed in Ternopil region of the then Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic, and never returned to Russia. The respective unclassified documents, or declassified documents, were made public by our Defense Ministry at a press conference in Moscow in September last year. Well, and obviously these materials also were made available to the JIT.
What does that tell us? That it had never come back to Russia? What conclusion can we draw from that?
Well, I'm not an investigator. I'm not here to draw conclusions. It's not my task. Russia has been excluded from investigation. But it seems that our task is to point out the discrepancies and at least to expect that the information that looks crucial to anybody, it doesn't take to be an expert to see it is crucial, it is important. But that's why I was watching very intensely the press conference on the 19th of June. It was the first public appearance of JIT after it displayed the missiles parts. It requested the information about them publicly and received this information. And one could expect that at their next public appearance they would say something about it, at least. But through the whole press conference no word was said about that. And then in the question time, after a journalist asked a direct question about the Ukrainian provenance of the missile, the answer was, well, let me cited. The answer was that the information supplied by Russia, I quote, didn't give the right picture, unquote. Well, I can fully appreciate that the missile being in fact a Ukrainian one could not possibly be the right picture for JIT, of which Ukraine is a part. But then, please stop pretending it's an impartial and professional investigation.
You sort of touched on this before, but what disappoints you most about the JIT's reaction to Russia's findings?
That is exactly what I'm talking about. I was really shocked by this kind of discarding the obvious facts. It seems that the investigation, right from the beginning, has been guided by two simple rules. Rule 1, Russia is to blame. Rule 2, when in doubt, see Rule 1. And that's all.
Do you feel there has been strong bias in the JIT investigation?
Yes, I do, frankly. I do feel so.
Australian families, or all families of the victims, are still hurting. Do you feel they have been treated fairly and told the truth about what's happened and what we know?
We feel, in fact, deep sympathy to the bereaved families, and we think that they do deserve truth. Until now, they've been offered, instead of truth, ingeniously crafted surrogate of it. And I don't think it's right. I also would like to point to one thing. Until now, there is no truth as to who fired the missile. But there is one aspect of truth which has been established beyond any doubt. And it is about asking the simple question: why at all the commercial flights were being allowed to overfly the zone of a heavy military operations? And who was responsible for preventing this situation? And then let me refer to the Dutch Safety Board report, saying, and I quote, Ukraine had sufficient reason to close the entire airspace over the eastern part of Ukraine. And I think it's high time to hold Ukraine accountable for not doing so, and for allowing in the summer days of 2014 up to 200 commercial flights flying over the eastern Ukraine. And on the day of the crash, there were 160, if I'm not mistaken, until one of them was actually shot.
What would Russia like to see from the investigation going forward?
Look, I'm not naive, and I cannot expect the investigation to change its ways. They've gone too far already. But I do hope, and I do expect, rather the world public and the Australian public for that matter, to be not that indiscriminate and uncritical about the so-called findings of JIT. And I expect people to think for themselves, to look for facts, and to use just common sense. And I think if we are to see the truth revealed one day, all of us should do just